The Florida Panthers' inability to match the Boston Bruins' desperation proved costly. No lines generated anything outside of the top line, and in this goalie duel, Jeremy Swayman was the one more superior. So now there is a Game 6 on Friday night.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, May 15th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News, and you can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 bet. That's $150 with any $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. So the Florida Panthers came into Game 5 of this best-of-7 series against the Boston Bruins. And even with the loss, still everything with the Florida Panthers are still, like I said yesterday, things are still stacked in the Florida Panthers' favor as far as talent, health at this moment in time. But what a missed opportunity for the Florida Panthers to create anything, as there was very little energy for the Florida Panthers outside of that top line on the night, and really didn't generate too much, didn't really get much to net front for the Panthers. And Jeremy Swayman was great, 28 of 29 on the night. Sergei Bobrovsky was great on the other end for the Panthers too, but the inability to create offense got the Florida Panthers this result. Now there is a Game 6, in Boston at the TD Garden on Friday night. But here to recap this 2-1 Florida Panthers loss against the Boston Bruins from Amerant Bank Arena. It is a Winans Wednesday edition of the show. Jacob Winans is back. Jacob, welcome back to the show. Unfortunately, you are here on a loss for the Panthers instead of a series clincher for them. So welcome back to the show, my friend.
Yep, thanks for having me as always. I had hoped that this would be a celebratory podcast. I was hoping we would have been able to talk about closing out a series 4-1, similar to the Tampa series. The fans brought it. It was an electric atmosphere down there, and everyone was kind of into the game, thinking that this was going to be a closeout game. Seemed like we had Boston on the ropes, and then kind of went out there and laid an egg a little bit. It was kind of a dud of a game. Really, really, really flat first period. You knew Boston was going to press, but the Panthers didn't really match it at all. They were quite honestly lucky to get out of that period at 1-0. Tied it up and then went flat again. Not really the effort you're looking for in a closeout game. There's not a whole lot to say. Beyond that, we can break down the game, get into some of the looking ahead. But all in all, if I'm giving a brief just statement vibe check on that game, it was a dud. And not at all Panthers hockey.
Yeah, and and for this one for the Panthers, when you have the shot on goal differential for the Bruins 12-4, and you're not getting the territorial advantage that you were in the first in games 2 through 4 that you were, Bob is not gonna always going to be resting on a beach chair and just sipping a margarita every single time. And really for Bobrovsky, this was the one game where you were even looking at the first period and thinking, okay, Bobrovsky's finally getting that one game where he's proving his worth, because there's been a lot of talk about him and just, his save percentage isn't great. But Greg Wyshynski also wrote an article about the details of Bobrovsky and just making those timely saves. And if anyone can spend a whole hockey game not dealing as many shots and make timely saves. It's him, but really he for the Panthers, he kept them in it through the first period. I mean, for the Panthers, their power play, they really didn't really get too much going for them in this game. For the Panthers, struggled with zone entries, didn't really get too much to the net front, didn't get the many deflections that they needed. I mean, there was also some wild play in the neutral zone where David Pastrnak goes on a mini breakaway, in that same shift he's spinning around Gus Forsling too. I mean, it was a little bit of miscombobulated for the Panthers in that first period. I mean, and this is the thing, the Panthers are were 14-2 goal differential in the final 40 minutes of this series. So when they brought that stat up, I was thinking, okay, it's a marathon, not a sprint for the Panthers too. But I mean, really for them, it took a Paul Maurice tirade on the bench for the Panthers to finally get their first goal at 6:23, like 11 seconds to be exact after that. So it just goes to show for the Panthers, just minds weren't there for them, the desperation level. And even Paul Maurice spoke this morning about the desperation level for the Boston Bruins on, hey, this could be your last night of the season, and how emotionally the Panthers could be maybe looking too far ahead, even if they're not saying it out loud, for the Eastern Conference Final.
Yeah, and sometimes when you start to think ahead, it takes a loss like that to snap you back into focus and kind of wake up like, oh crap, we still have business to finish here. And I think the Panthers are going to feel that. They've put themselves in a tough spot. Going back to Boston in a Game 6, the storyline is going to be Brad Marchand. He was at morning skate today. Assume he'd probably be able to play, but given the nature, it's a head injury, it's a concussion. You can't predict that. You don't know what the recovery looks like, and hockey injuries are so secretive, but it doesn't really matter. You know, it's a concussion, and concussions are unpredictable. So we can't count him in or out, but I would venture to guess if he's able to play, he will. That would be a huge emotional boost for the team. It also gives them back their leader and second or third best player. That's a big impact. Boston, their crowd's going to be into it. And if you lose that, all the pressure shifts. And we saw this last year. The Panthers were on the other side of this. The close game in Boston in Game 5, and they come out with a win there. The famous Chucky quote, "Remember this room, we'll be back." It's a little bit concerning, I guess, because you saw what happened last season, what the Panthers did to Boston, and Boston definitely has that on their minds, wanting to do it back. But I will say this: there are a couple positives I can take from this. One, Bob's best game of the series.
Yes.
He kept the Panthers in it. There were at least 5 or 6 chances where Boston could have scored, and this could have been a blowout of a game. Bob kept them in it, made some great saves, gave them a chance to win. And that's been the question. They've been winning, but it's been, can Bob make the big saves, the timely saves when he's not facing many shots? His save percentage looks bad, but it's because the shots have been low and the quality high, which you can live with that if it ends up being 2 goals a game on less than 20 shots. That's fine. And we saw him make the big saves against Tampa. The Bobbery, we saw the big saves made against Tampa. It managed to close that series out. Can he make the timely saves against Boston? I think he proved that tonight. I'm not concerned about Bob going forward.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's encouraging to me about this is that the mistakes, the Panthers, the 2 goals they gave up were on mental errors. It wasn't being outskilled. It wasn't being outclassed. It was on complete mental lapses. And why I'm not super concerned about that is because those mental lapses came from the Panthers' best players. And it's not guys that are likely to repeat that. Carter Verhaeghe fell asleep on the first goal.
Mm-hmm.
He's been
let Morgan Geekie go down Main Street there.
Yep. And if you watch the replay, he had no idea Geekie was even there until he was already past him. And he tried to quickly jump back into position. It was too late. You're not going to see Carter Verhaeghe make too many mental errors. And then the Charlie McAvoy goal, there was a collision behind the Bruins net. So Chucky and Bennett collide, late getting back on the back check. And Verhaeghe and I believe it was Kulikov or Ekman Larson, there was an interchange there, an exchange, and two guys went to the same side, forgot to cover the middle, and that's where you end up. But it was the Panthers' second line that had those two errors, those two mental lapses. You're not going to see that too much. I don't feel like. So
yeah.
At the end of the day, it's a bad loss. You want to finish this at home, but we also expected a long series, and I leave this game with the impression the Panthers are the better team. They are the more talented team. They're the better team. It's just, is the will to win going to be high enough to close the gap? Because I felt like tonight Boston's will to win was much higher, and the Panthers aren't so much better than Boston that they can just cruise through without having that same level of intensity and focus. So Panthers are the more talented team. It's just the focus level has to match that, because this time of year the talent level doesn't matter nearly as much.
Yeah, and also with some unforced errors. Once again, their third too many men call on in the series, which you could argue that was maybe interference, but six guy on the ice touching the puck and making plays. So yeah, so that would put Morgan Geekie in the box instead of Hampus Lindholm, who originally made contact with Montour there, and also for the Bruins committing a penalty 2 seconds left on a power play, and the amount of times we saw Jim Montgomery do this in the broadcast. If you're not watching this on YouTube, you're seeing me exaggerate a dive for him too. And also how also for the Panthers video review for that second goal, which this isn't going to be a podcast I'm complaining about officiating. Hey, Boston got theirs after the Panthers got theirs in Game 3, so we're not going to spend a whole podcast discussing that. So I will leave it there for the Panthers there. And also for the Panthers, not a single shot attempt by the Bruins in the last 5 minutes of the second period. So that's a little bit of encouraging thing that we could go into Game 6. But we're going to transition over to our second segment here, where we're going to discuss more about when we thought the game was won or lost and our 3 duds of the game. We're going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Policy Genius. And Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide your family with financial safety net starting today. Policy Genius helps you compare your options from top companies, and their team of licensed experts is on hand to help you talk through it. Your work-life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family needs. Even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. Policy Genius gives you the unbiased advice from your licensed expert support team. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonhl or click on the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes to see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockedonnhl. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Back on this Wednesday, May 15th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Winans Wednesday edition of the show, where the Florida Panthers are coming off a 2-1 loss at the hands of the Boston Bruins at home in Game 5 of the second round. So now there is a Game 6 on Friday for Panthers Bruins. And the worst part about this, it's a 2-day gap in between the two games. So what an advantage the Panthers would have had if they won this one. The Rangers and Hurricanes had to have a 2-day gap in between their games. Their games are on Thursday. There's only a 1-game night tomorrow. Today, since you guys are listening to this on a Wednesday. So we won't know the time of Game 6 until Avs Stars is over on Wednesday night. So time TBD for Game 6 at the TD Garden. But let's discuss more about our duds of the game. And honestly, I actually had a listener reach out to me talking about stars of the game whenever there's a loss and say, hey, we don't want to listen about the opposition stars. And I asked them, do you prefer duds of the game? And that person said, yes, always trying to take recommendations from you guys and send them in to email or in the comments below. But 3 duds of the game for the Panthers here. I got to go with Oliver Ekman-Larsson as number 1 for me. Not a great game by him. Lots of turnovers, especially power play 2 was having a hard time just getting any zone time too for the Panthers, and also some turnovers that created rushes for the Bruins. So that's number 1 for me. Number 2 is Carter Verhaeghe. We mentioned this in the first segment. Caught in no man's land to allow Geeky to get to the net, and also going back to the first one, OEL was outmuscled by Jake DeBrusk after that shot went off the boards too. So that's another thing for OEL there. And number 3, Matthew Tkachuk. I have to say I didn't really see him too much of getting in front, creating havoc, upsetting the opposition as much as we're so used to with him. So for me, I gotta go with those 3 as duds of the game for the Panthers here in this 2-1 loss. Who are yours, Jacob?
Yeah, so mine's relatively the same, but I'm gonna word mine a little bit differently. My third is it's gonna be the Panthers' third D pair. It's OEL and Kulikov. I have them as my third dud, just as a unit. I think that D pair really struggled with puck management, really struggled in board battles tonight, really struggled in getting out of their own end. And like you said, OEL had a bunch of turnovers, unforced. Didn't really like their game at all, and they were on for both goals against. My second dud of the game is going to be the Panthers' second line. Verhaeghe had possibly his worst game. You could make a case it was his worst game of the season. I felt like the 2 defensive errors were bad. The first one was really bad, and then I felt like the forecheck was lacking a little bit. I felt like his shot was a little off. He missed the net on a couple of really good chances. He just didn't seem to have the legs tonight. But it wasn't just him. Tkachuk had a rough game, was pretty much invisible, and Sam Bennett struggled a lot. I don't want to harp on him too much, given that he's coming back from an injury, but he was noticeably struggling handling the puck. Had some unforced turnovers, had some issues, just doing simple puck handling and stick handling in the neutral zone, where he's usually so good at his zone entries and driving the play. He's struggling to control the puck right now, which I have to assume is related to that hand-wrist injury. He'll have to figure out a way to work through that. But my number 1 dud of the game, and it's not even close, it's a landslide here. It is the power play, the top power play unit in particular. Brandon Montour looked lost. Montour looked absolutely lost running the power play tonight. Passing up shots. Reinhart missed the net on multiple occasions where they had good chances. Barkov wasn't looking to shoot. And Barkov in particular really struggled on the power play tonight, losing some key faceoffs. It seemed like every time the Panthers were out there, they lost a faceoff, and immediately that kills 45 seconds of zone time because they struggled to break in. I thought the passes for at the blue line, the zone entry passes were off. Saw some offsides there, second unit as well. The power play just looked ugly tonight. A lot of shots missed the net, not enough traffic. It didn't look anything like what the Panthers usually look like on the power play, especially in this series. Not super high concern level as far as that. I feel like they'll bounce back, but that was a pretty abysmal game on the power play. And the key with the power play, even if you don't score, you'd like to get a ton of zone time. You'd like to put pressure on the goalie, turn the momentum a little bit. It did the opposite tonight. It was quick in, quick out, and it gave momentum to Boston because it was just wasted time. So the power play is my number 1 dud, and honorable mention here, fourth line. I didn't like the fourth line's game tonight really either. Carlo Pozo,
very little minutes too.
Very, very, very few minutes. And you'd like to see in those few minutes them being more impactful, given that they would have the fresh legs. But I felt like Carlo Pozo, he had a really, really good chance in front of the net, misplayed the puck. Steven Lorentz didn't really do a whole lot in his couple of minutes of ice time. Stenlund wasn't really the dominant faceoff force. I felt like it was I feel like they might need a little bit of an adjustment as far as a lineup change. I wouldn't be shocked to see Cousins or Lomberg or somebody in for Lawrence in the next game. But those are my duds, and out of all of those, I don't have super high level of worry as far as them bouncing back, because those are not the guys who usually struggle.
Yeah. That fourth line in the little minutes that they had, 1 to 3 shot on goal advantage for the opposition. For the third line, 7 to 2 in favor of the opposition. Even though the Corsi was in favor of the second line, their shots on goal, they had a lot of their shots were just getting blocked, so nothing was getting to the net. But quickly, before we transition to segment number 3, the moment where you thought this game was won or lost. Well, my moment was a Brandon Montour moment towards the end, but also Montour also had a big loss in edge and behind the net where Morgan Geekie got to the net front and Bob had to go way out of his net, puck missed, and then he had to go back. He was lucky that Boston couldn't retrieve the puck when the net was wide open, so he was still able to get back into his position. But the moment where I thought the game was lost, because I thought the Panthers still had a chance towards the end. Lots of zone time after the 6-on-5, but the Montour in between the legs shot, I thought that was going to go in, even though Montour didn't have his best game. But that's my moment. How about yours?
Yeah, I'm torn between two. One of them would be Sam Reinhart with 7 or so seconds left. Had a golden opportunity. I thought he was going to bury it. Swayman makes a save. Good save, probably his best save of the night. But my moment
the 5-hole.
Yeah, he went 5-hole. It was open, but Swayman got it with the stick, which was that's best on best right there. Great shooter, great goalie. Great goalie wins that one. It happens. But my other moment, I'm going to lean towards this one, is the 4th power play. I feel like the Panthers had that was their chance to tie the game. You go on the power play in the 3rd period. I felt like that was the moment, and the power play was a dud. So that's my moment where I felt like they lost the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on that 4th power play, multiple chances there where Reinhart missed the net completely with Jeremy Swayman out of his position. Even a few seconds after, Pass had a chance in front of the net where Forsling checked the puck out of him and almost went through the legs of Bob too. So that was a big series of unfortunate events for the Panthers, where even though you miss your opportunity on the power play, a goal doesn't go into your end, and you still, after all that, you still have a chance at the end. And that's why for me, it's you know that the top guys aren't going to make the same mistakes again. And that's something. It's kind of like we're reliving game 1 again, except not as many goals on the other end for the Boston Bruins. Just inability to get second chances and just to take away the eyes of Jeremy Swayman. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3. We're going to discuss a poll that I put up about our concernometer, and also to discuss something that Paul Maurice, what Paul Maurice had to say about his profanity filled tirade on the bench. We're going to discuss that more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And it's winner take all in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 bet. That's $150 on bets, on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Third and final segment here on this Wednesday, May 15th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Winans Wednesday edition of the show, where the Florida Panthers are coming off a 2-1 loss against the Boston Bruins in Game 5 from Amerant Bank Arena, where now the Florida Panthers will be playing a Game 6 on Friday night at the TD Garden. Still time TBD. So, before we get to the quotes, from Paul Maurice. I put out a poll on talking about the concernometer for on the Locked On Florida Panthers Twitter page, and honestly, I know Twitter can be a little bit of a cesspool, but more people are in the 1 to 3 category. So the the choices were 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, or 10 with a crap ton of exclamation points. So 44% so far, 187 people voted. 44% of them say 1 to 3. Could be a lot different if they don't come out with a win in Game 6. So I would say a little bit. I would say maybe I would tend to agree, maybe like 3.5 around there as far as my concernometer based on the Florida Panthers play, because we saw in Game 4 against Tampa, they respond. Game 1 against Boston, they respond. So now it's a matter of just doing it again. It's really hard to see this team have 2 bad games in a row. Jacob, your concernometer, my friend.
I tend to get a little bit more nervous than most. I sometimes tend to buy a little bit into the potential storylines and how they may affect the game, and just the storyline of what the Panthers did to Boston last year, hanging over this series. It just has a feeling, a little bit of a feeling of deja vu, except we're on the wrong side of it this time. And sometimes you watch sports long enough. Sometimes you can just feel something coming. You can feel a run coming. You can feel the momentum shift. I feel like tonight the momentum turned a little bit, but I don't feel like it's completely out of control. I feel like if the Panthers lose Game 6 in Boston, they're in big trouble in a Game 7, even at home. So with that said, I feel like Game 6 is really a Game 7, and I feel like it's a must win. And anytime you're in a must-win situation, the concern meter is, for me, above a 5. I'd put it between a 5 and a 6 for me. It's not panic time. Panthers are still the better team. They've got health on their side a little bit right now. Sam Bennett's obviously still struggling, but health-wise, it's not like we've got key players out of the lineup at the moment. I think Game 6 is going to be low scoring. I think Game 6 is going to be gritty, physical. I wouldn't be shocked to see that go to overtime. I think it's going to be a toe-to-toe heavyweight fight, and it's going to come down to a greasy goal. I think the Panthers are equipped for that. So my concern level is between 5 and a 6, but for me, it's impossible to be as low as a 1 to 3, given how the Panthers look tonight, and Boston's motivated going back to Boston. Goalie is hot right now. It also, just the fact that they have this long streak of winning playoff games in Boston, it just feels like at some point that's going to come to an end. It's hard to continue to beat the same team in their building, especially a team as great as the Boston Bruins. I feel like it's tough to continue to beat them in their own building. At some point, Boston's going to win a home game. So for those reasons, it's between a 5 and a 6, but it's not low confidence at all. I feel like the Panthers still have a good shot to wrap this up in 6, and we really cannot see this going to 7 games, because then the concern meter is through the roof.
Yeah, and you spoke about history for the Panthers, but in this from last year, but on the opposite end, they have the home ice this time. They're the one who were up 3-1, but that they're the one who are up 3-1 currently, and then for the Bruins winning a big Game 5 on the road. Now you're going back to a very comfortable crowd who's going to boo the hell out of Sam Bennett for sure. He's going to once again feel the love or lack thereof from the crowd. So yeah, it's definitely a big deal going back to Boston for both teams. But at the same time, for me, when you see the desperation level for Boston and what Florida didn't, it's really hard for me to believe that it's going to happen again for a second straight game where you're going to see territorial advantage for the Boston Bruins being shot on goal advantage 12-4 to start, and for Let me see, shot attempts 20-8 at 5-on-5 for the Bruins after one period. But also one thing before we get out of here, the profanity filled tirade for Paul Maurice. He said, quote, "I wasn't mad at them. I understood what they were going through. I just thought they needed some profanity in their life, and I brought some," close quote. And also he went off to say, "I might not be great at a few things, but bleep me, that is one of them." So we can't curse on this program, but that was also just pure comedy. But also, it starts with the coach too. Let's not forget, if he's going out here and saying this too, then we know that the team is in good spirits. And also, he said this quote, "It's going to be an absolute barn burner out there. There will be 18,000 cameras at morning skate just to see how many sips of water bottle Brad Marchand takes. It's going to take some high-end investigative journalism," close quote.
Yeah, I love it. The mood is light, and if the mood is light there, then we really have no choice but to trust him. When the Panthers were going through their struggles towards the end of the season, hit that rough skid, losing streak, he came out. He said he's not worried. He said, "I know why they're playing the way they're playing," and they almost immediately rebounded. Similar quote here. He's not worried. He said he understands what they're going through. Closeout games are hard. They didn't match the intensity of Boston. They're going to have to be ready next game. I feel like this is a team that this is adversity, and the Panthers have proven over the past couple of years they don't really shy away from adversity. They've got a good group of guys who tend to step up in the spotlight when the lights are brightest, and Barkov has stepped up this season, added himself to that list of clutch time performers, and I'm confident in the group they have to finish this thing in 6 games. Let's hope it ends in 6 and we don't even have to talk about a game 7. But I'm confident in this group. I feel like they can get it done. And if the mood is light and the players aren't stressed about going there for a big game, backs against the wall a little bit, then we shouldn't be either. I think they've got this.
It's all about being comfortable in the uncomfortable. And I think that could be good for the Panthers for a team who loves playing on the road. Their style of play is a road game too. And they are up for the challenge. They love the environment. So I'm really looking forward to see how they come out.
And I'll say this, it's very, very, very unlikely, nearly impossible to win a Stanley Cup without having a series go to 6 or 7. It's just part of the journey. And we knew going in, this was going to be a long series. Let's remember, these are 2 teams that were separated by 1 point in the regular season. This was never going to be a quick wrap them up type of series. That's just not realistic at this time of year. I gotta expect 6 or 7 games in every series from this point on out. So remain level headed. And also before we head out, real quick, I just want to make sure I recognize this. Shout out to the Panthers fans, but also the Panthers media for not and the coach as well for not crying and whining and complaining and screaming about the goaltender interference challenge that the Panthers lost. It ended up being the game-winning goal. They handled as an organization, as a fan base, as a coaching staff, handled that much, much better than Boston did with their own goalie interference challenge. So have to make mention of that. It's not necessarily a dig at Boston. It's more commending our side of things without trying to start any kind of controversy or ruffle any feathers. Just want to say I'm proud of Panthers fans and the Panthers organization for taking the high road.
Yep. And I got nothing more to add on that, but Jacob, great ending. But Jacob, I want to thank you so much for joining me once again on this Winans Wednesday edition of the show. A 2-1 loss for the Florida Panthers, but still 2 more opportunities to close it out and advance to the Eastern Conference Final. So thank you once again. If you want to follow Jacob online, you can follow him at Jacob Winans 8, where you'll see him live tweeting throughout the game, just like you can for myself. So Jacob, thank you so much once again, my friend, and I will see you next week, dude.
Looking forward to it. Thanks. More hockey.
And if you like what you're hearing, Please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL Network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Jacob Winans, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.